Hey everyone, I'm Sean Deveney from Heavy Sports. We're talking NBA here, and we're very lucky to have our eminent NBA insider, Steve Bulpett. Hey Steve, how are you this morning?
Kind of ladling it on a little thick this morning, aren't we, there, Sean?
I got you up early, so not that early, I guess, but
I've been out, aren't
I know. I kid. Interesting week, I think, for the NBA, obviously, with the settling of the Kevin Durant stuff. What's gone on in the last month and a half, 2 months here. It's been remarkable to watch. But from a Celtics perspective, should this have ever really been a Celtics story? And it seemed like something that they got dragged into almost against their will.
Yeah, I mean, the Celtics were involved. Kevin Durant was available or allegedly available. Yeah, I mean, you'd have to want him. You have to be interested in him. You have to be interested in for the Celtics, keeping your finger on that pulse, because it's not just important in the sense of whether or not you can get Kevin Durant, but where he goes is important to you, because you're competing for a championship, and where Kevin Durant could possibly go could alter that balance. So, you've got to make sure that you're involved in that and those discussions to whatever degree.
Last year, obviously, there was the sweep in the playoffs. I know that you're always quick to point out that it was a pretty tight sweep as sweeps go. It was not a blowout-laden sweep, and that could be important. But where do you see the Nets as in terms of if the Celtics are at the top of the heap in the Eastern Conference? Where do you see the Nets as being a threat there?
Well, when you're talking about top of the heap, I would not discount Milwaukee. First of all, I know that's kind of you're not necessarily doing that, but I would keep them high in the discussion. The Nets' biggest opponent is the Nets. Can they get their stuff together? Because if you look at it and say Kevin Durant at his max for what it is even now, Kyrie Irving at his max for what it is, Ben Simmons, if he works, fits in a complementary sense, what he can do the best. If Joe Harris comes back and is able to give you stuff, Seth Curry is outside shooting. If you look at those things, and if those guys max individually and collectively, that's a pretty formidable team. But when you look at, the personality of some of the people involved, there's your question. Right. There's why people are maybe a little bit slow to jump on that.
Yeah, and I'd agree that I think Milwaukee is probably the biggest threat to the Celtics, and maybe when we're talking about who's the favorite, maybe should be there. Obviously, they didn't have Chris Middleton during their series last spring, and that obviously had a big impact on that. I agree. I think Milwaukee. Probably I'd go Milwaukee, Brooklyn, and Miami in terms of the potential threats to the Celtics, with Toronto sort of as a dark horse there.
Yeah, Miami's going to need some help. Losing PJ Tucker's big. They're going to need help.
Yeah, I'm not sure who else I'd have as a third team in the East in terms of threats to the Celtics. Toronto, I think, is going to be better than a lot of people realize. I mean, Chicago, we'll see. Obviously, health is a big thing there, and then Miami. I think any of those three could potentially.
Yeah, and you got to look at Philadelphia. I mean,
I know there's Philadelphia. Yeah,
Philadelphia. Yeah, they got PJ Tucker. That's going to help them. I mean, we're not talking about PJ like he's we're not sending him to Springfield anytime soon, but he can be a really important player for a good team. And of course, how is the James Harden, Joel Embiid dynamic going to work? They'll have more time to get that in order. It won't be slapped together on the fly like it was during last season.
Yeah. Just to change topics a little bit with the Celtics, Brad Stevens talked a little bit on the radio about a potential starting five for the Celtics, and his point coming in was, okay, we had the best starting five in the league last year. We're not going to change it, even after the acquisition of Malcolm Brogdon. That they still want to keep the starting five as is: Marcus Smart, Jaylen Brown, Jayson Tatum, Horford, and Robert Williams, and that was a fantastic starting five. They were plus 24.6 in their net rating this past year, and that was the best in the league by far. So, do you see the Celtics sticking with that? Certainly, I'd imagine opening night, but is that something that maybe they'll have to make some adjustments as they go?
I wouldn't see why. I'm not sure who you replace or how you reconfigure that group, but I think that group works. If they play to the right way, the way that their coach would like them to play, the tempo and all those things, I think that's fine. I don't see a problem with that five at all. I don't see anybody who's coming off the bench who should be starting in place of any of those guys, really.
Even Malcolm Brogdon.
Yeah, with Brogdon, look, he gives you a lot of a good varied menu, which is good coming off the bench, and more importantly, this guy's had trouble staying on the floor, so you want to be able to manage his minutes, manage his time, and being able to put him in, spot him as you like off the bench, I think is much better. I think him getting into that role and realizing he doesn't have to carry things, he doesn't have to be like a major, force, like maybe he needed to be in other places or he thought he needed to be in other places. The important thing from him is getting the proper buy-in to what his role is, but it's, keeping him healthy. And I think it's easier to do that when you're bringing him in off the bench.
Yeah. His last 4 years, he's been a starter, pretty much hasn't really been a consistent guy as a sixth man since his rookie year, which he did well in that year, by the way, when he won Rookie of the Year. But is that too much of a transition to ask for a guy like Brogdon? Is his game sort of conducive to coming off the bench? He doesn't necessarily need to be a starter with what he does.
I think his game is really conducive to that because again, he can provide strength in different areas. So when he's coming off the bench, number one, you're not playing, there's a good chance you're not playing against a starter, which is going to help you there. But number two, depending on matchups, he can be more of a facilitator. He can be more of a scorer. You always want him to bring the defense, but I think he's really well suited to that role. And the key thing with him has been, how happy is he with his situation? That's been an issue in the past at different stops. So, but everything we've heard from him and from people around him is that, yeah, he's all in on this and that he realizes he's not, an alpha in this situation, but he can be an alpha in his role.
Yeah, it's funny. I still think of him as a fairly young guy. He came into the league in 2016, but he was already 24. He was a 4-year player, and I think he had an extra year even in college. So he's not that young of a guy. I mean, he's at that stage of his career where he's done his scoring. He's got whatever individual stuff he's going to do now. He wants to win, and that usually leads a guy to accepting a role off the bench more so than they would have done when they were, in their third year in the NBA.
Sure. Yeah. And again, look, we've written about this, that he came into the league, his health was raising red flags all over the place. He's carved out a pretty good thing so far, but the injuries have really been a problem in him staying on the floor. I mean, you can say, I'd love to have a guy of Malcolm Brogdon's skill level, but if he ain't on the floor, he's not helping you. So, the Celtics have got a few guys I think they've got to manage this year. And, having more depth, having a Malcolm Brogdon, having a Danilo Gallinari, having a Grant Williams with more experience. It's I still think they'd like to have another more reliable big man to bring in to spell people, but keeping guys like Brogdon, keeping guys like Al Horford and Rob Williams, getting them through the regular season healthy and prepared to be able to do what you need in the postseason is going to be huge for this team.
Yeah. One last thing for you, Steve, and just looking at the Celtics and how things are shaping up in 2022, 23, but maybe going back and looking a little bit at last year, Jayson Tatum revealed something last week that really opened my eyes when he said that he had suffered a fracture in his left wrist around the Super Bowl. So, around early February or so, just before the All-Star break. Pretty remarkable that he was able to play through that and didn't let anybody know. I mean, really kind of kept his head down, and that was never a thing. He averaged 30.5 points in the second half of the year. Of course, we know how well the Celtics played in that second half. Plus, he had the shoulder injury in Game 3, I believe it was, against Miami in the Eastern Conference Finals, and that clearly bothered him throughout. Still, there are people who will suggest that Jayson Tatum is not tough enough. Does this in any way sort of lay some of that to rest?
Yeah, I haven't heard the not tough enough thing, to be honest. So, but no, I mean, look. He had it wasn't like his wrist was broken and the bones were separated. But I will say this, and it's not just about Jayson Tatum. It's about a lot of guys. When you get to that point in the season, stuff hurts, and you're playing through stuff. Certainly Rob Williams was. Certainly Al Horford was having to manage things to get through. That's you play through injuries, and it's what's the old line? You need to know the difference between pain and injury, but yeah, I hadn't heard anything about the he's not tough thing, because if anything, he might go to the basket with a little too much recklessness sometimes, driving into 2 and 3 guys, when it's better to move the ball and get it back. But yeah, I didn't see that as an issue for him at all, really.
Yeah, it is interesting. Sometimes it's more sort of the way a guy conducts himself on the floor. He's always been sort of a laid back and kind of quiet guy, and sometimes that can be perceived, especially if things aren't going right, that can be perceived as, well, he's not tough enough, that sort of thing. That's how I've always kind of viewed that it doesn't necessarily mean that the guy doesn't have the grit that other guys do just because somebody else is yelling and screaming a little bit more.
Yeah, no, and look, yeah, well, Jason yells and screams at the officials. And I think his defense is kind of underrated too. I think it's a big part of his game. I think it's in turn a huge part of the Celtics game, because their defense is what carried them when their offense would, take vacations during games. It's what allowed them to stay in games and maybe come back and win some at the end.
Yeah, I'd agree with that, and it's an interesting thing. When Jalen Brown was first coming in, I think that he had a reputation as being a better defender than Jayson Tatum, and certainly that was how he had to get on the floor in his rookie year. He really had to put it out there on the defensive end, or else he wasn't going to play much. But I don't know. It's a debate, certainly, which one is better. I'd say they're pretty even now defensively. That wasn't what Tatum's reputation was when he came in.
Yeah, well, yeah, I think Jalen's a little bit more of a physical defender, but that's just, body type right now. And as we know, Jayson Tatum has gotten stronger. Which is going to happen when you're a young, skinny kid. You're going to acquire weight and you're going to acquire strength as long as you're putting the work in. And they've got 50,000 strength and conditioning people to make sure that you're on the right program and all these things. So yeah, I'm not surprised that look, at their age, Jalen Brown, Jayson Tatum, they're really good right now. I think there's every reason to expect that they're going to be better this coming year and the year after and the year after that.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Steve. Appreciate it. We are now 1 month away from Media Day in the NBA. Hard to believe, but my, how the summer flies. Thanks again, Steve.